Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
These topics that we discuss on Superhuman Radio are actually shaping and molding health, especially when we talk about nutrition. We're going to talk about the role of dairy cows in contributing to greenhouse gases, and more importantly, also to some very important elements of healthy, wholesome nutrition. Before we get started, I have to thank my title sponsor, and that's Legendary Foods, makers of the Tasty Pastry. The Tasty Pastry started out as a solution to the Pop-Tart, but it's become so much more, because you'll think you're really eating cake when you eat the Tasty Pastry. The flavors are amazing. 20 grams of high-quality protein, less than 1 gram of sugar, and for those of us who observe our carbohydrate intake, 4 to 5 net carbs, so it'll keep you in your lane if you're a low-carb or keto person. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10 today and save 10% off, and let them know that you heard about them here on Superhuman Radio. Dr. Robin White, how are you, Dr. White?
I'm doing well today. Thank you.
Thanks for being here too. This is an important subject, and it's also a subject that takes a lot of courage. I have to say something, because the ad hominem, phrases today, that how cows are destroying the planet because of cow farts. Sorry for my vulgarity. But they're contributing to greenhouse gases, and they're bad, and we shouldn't be eating meat, and we shouldn't be drinking milk, and all these other things that from an evolutionary perspective actually reshaped who we are and who we became. And doing anything counter to that narrative today takes a lot of guts. It really, really does. So at first I have to commend you for working on this research. And basically, you have been a co-author on a study that shows that cows really contribute a lot less to dairy cows contribute a lot less to greenhouse gases, but provide hundreds of millions of people with much needed nutritional factors. Why this study? What led you to this?
Yeah, it's a great first question to start out this discussion with. And it actually begins the story exactly as you're saying. I'm trained as an animal scientist and actually as an animal nutritionist. And the longer you involve yourself in the field of animal agriculture, the more negative things you start to hear about animal agriculture. As a scientist, it's my job to take the types of information that are available to the public and ask what type of factual basis there is behind that information. And so when we started, 10 or so years ago, to see this rhetoric change from just the popular media to expanding into things like government policy documents, and to take a major place in shaping the way that we define human nutrient requirements. And it started to become a really important question to ask, to take a step back as an animal scientist, to say, I'm trained to recognize the benefits of animals, but certainly the broader policy community, the broader American public, and perhaps even sections of the broader scientific community are starting to see really negative aspects of animal agriculture. So where is the truth between these two very different stories? The story that animals are a wasteful extravagance, that they're depleting our natural resources and negatively impacting our environment. And the story that I learned as an animal scientist, that ruminant animals in particular, cows and sheep, provide this incredible recycling capacity to our food chain, where they take materials that you and I can't consume and convert them into high concentration sources of protein. Surely the truth has got to lie somewhere in the middle. Cows aren't exclusively good. Cows aren't exclusively bad. So Oh, 3 years ago, actually, a colleague and I decided to tackle that question as it applies to U.S. agriculture. And we, in 2017, published a study focusing on what would happen if we removed all of animals from U.S. agriculture. The net result of that study was that we projected we would have a greater weight of food available, so more total food. But despite having more total food available, we would end up with more nutrient deficiencies. So additional nutrients that would not be produced in sufficient quantity to meet the needs of the US population. Along with that, the greenhouse gas benefit associated with this really dramatic shift in our agricultural system would result in less than a 3% reduction in total US greenhouse gas emissions. As a part of, or I suppose in response to that study.
Wait. I have to stop you because
yeah, certainly.
You just kind of just rolled over something. So you're saying if we eliminated all animal husbandry, chickens, everything, all animal husbandry, that all the total net impact on the accumulation of greenhouse gases would be around 3%
of the total emissions produced in the US, correct?
I mean, like right there and then, people with, and sadly, I'm going to say this and with real depth of sadness, but there's not a lot of critical thinkers out there any longer. But I would think that anyone with critical thinking skills would go, wait a minute, you're telling me not just cows, but every animal that we use today in animal husbandry, we just stop all of that. And all we're going to do is make a 3% dent in this huge, quote unquote, greenhouse gas problem. Well, that's not the issue. So let's forget about the animals and move on to something more sensible.
Yeah, certainly whether you view 3% as a large progression toward our goals or a small progression is very much kind of in the eyes of the beholder. If you compare that in the context of the types of reductions that we would have been mandated to meet under things like the Paris Agreement, I certainly view it as kind of a drop in the bucket. Almost a little over 10% of what we would have attempted to achieve. But certainly, when you weigh that against the potential socioeconomic consequences of disrupting our agricultural system, the potential practical consequences, it starts to present itself as a less than ideal solution.
Right. Okay, so this particular study, you looked exclusively, now you've looked at all animals in the past, so we can actually bring some of that information into the discussion as well. But this particular study, you looked at just dairy cows. Why did you look at just dairy cows? Just curious.
Yeah, so as a part of that 2017 paper, when we started snooping the data a little bit, we realized that a large portion of that contribution in terms of human edible nutrients is coming from our dairy industry. Of course, dairy cattle are also ruminants, and so they produce methane and therefore almost by default are associated with higher contributions to greenhouse gas emissions than perhaps some of our other monogastric animal species, pigs and chickens, which do not produce methane. So they became a really interesting case study to evaluate some of the assumptions that we used in that 2017 paper. Because in response to that paper, we had some questions from the animal community about how would you go about eliminating animal agriculture? What would that look like? And we had some questions from other scientists that perhaps want to have historically highlighted some of the negative aspects of animal agriculture, questioning how our assumptions in that previous study influenced the results that we came out with. Because of course we don't have a system. There are no agricultural systems recorded in the world that do not have animals. That should point us toward a finding in and of itself. But we don't have an example of what this might look like to study. So we had to make assumptions in projecting what it would look like. And of course, the results of any study are partially dependent on the assumptions. So this dairy cattle study allowed us to address some of those additional questions. How do the assumptions affect our results? How might we actually get rid of animal agriculture in a more targeted setting, focusing exclusively on these animals that we think provide a tremendous quantity human edible nutrients, but also have this elevated contribution to environmental impact.
Now, before we move on, I read a long time ago that pastured cows don't produce the amount of methane gas that grain-fed and corn-fed cows produce. So in theory, if you let cows do what cows were designed to do, and that is just go and graze on grass, this whole contribution to greenhouse gases kind of fades away. Is there any truth to that, or is that a misunderstanding?
That's actually a little bit backwards. So cattle produce, via the laws of thermodynamics, between 2 and 12% of the energy that they consume as methane. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, it merely changes forms, right? And so somewhere between 2 and 12% of the energy they consume will be emitted as methane. Cattle that are consuming forage-based diets produce more methane as a proportion of their energy intake than those consuming high concentrate diets, which would be consuming grains and soy diets predominantly. There are a few reasons why moving animals to a forage-only diet may contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in the case of dairy cattle in the US. And that is mostly because we would diminish their production level. So we feed dairy cattle a ration that's roughly 60% forage, so grasses and hays and silages. That is in part to try and elevate their feed efficiency, meaning to produce more milk per unit of feed input. If we allowed them to exclusively consume a forage-based ration, they wouldn't produce as much milk and they would have a lower feed efficiency. They may also have lower net methane emissions, but it's not really a fair comparison because you're not comparing them on the same production level. Right. So you'd have the concurrent kind of negative benefit of reducing the total quantity of milk available for human consumption. Okay.
All right, so you looked at 3 different ways to assess the potential impact on either reducing or eliminating dairy cows in general. Talk about those first.
Yeah, so like I said, we had some questions from our fellow animal scientists about, have people actually thought about how we would get rid of animal agriculture? Because most people, I think if you took a survey and you asked, what do you think of when you think of getting rid of animal agriculture, they would think of retiring cows out to a pasture, much like the lovely background image you have here, and allowing them to sort of do their thing as cows, and we would no longer
and just pass away.
Exactly. The interesting aspect of that is that they would no longer be a livestock species. They would actually be a feral population. And so you would have to look at the challenges associated with managing that population, much like we look at issues like the feral horses in the US or our urban populations of wildlife.
Yeah, because what farmers would summarily do is just start killing their cows, because if they're not generating money with them and they're tying up land and water, now the farmer has become a zoo with no income. And so they would have to start killing all their cows. That's what they would end up doing. And then we'd have a group that would say, oh, this is so unfair to do to cows.
Yeah, so we take our retirement scenario, that's what we call it, kind of takes the lens of maybe past that social unrest in the transition period, and assumes that we get to some stable state where we treat cows as a feral population. So I live in the suburban southwestern Virginia. I have a herd of about 25 deer that come through my yard every night. Anybody in a similar situation could probably imagine maybe 15 deer and 10 cows coming through their yard every night.
Yeah.
So how we would manage that, again, comes to some very interesting socioeconomic questions. Would we be hunting cattle? Would we be working on some different population control mechanisms like we have with feral horses? either way, there's a pretty substantial expense associated with how you're going to maintain animals at a target population like that. So that was one scenario, right? And we tried to make that scenario as realistic as possible, given what we thought the average American consumer would imagine when we say we're going to get rid of cows. Then the scenario kind of on the opposite end of that is the economically realistic scenario. So US consumers say that they're no longer going to consume dairy products. There is a tremendous opportunity for international export and for processing of dairy products. And so US producers are going to continue to produce milk under business as usual scenario, and all of those nutrients no longer go to the US. Which is, again, probably the economically realistic way that this would occur. But it would
have impact on greenhouse gases, because basically what you're saying is it's going to be business as usual, just the targeted consumer changes. That's it.
Exactly. Yep. So we consider those to be kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum. And then we have a mid-range scenario, which would represent some sort of policy intervention where we slaughter all of the animals. So we tell our dairy producers, maybe we're going to pay you off, maybe there's going to be some incentive to do this, but we're going to go ahead and slaughter all of the dairy cows in the US. That's going to contribute a one-time food source. And again, we're going to evaluate kind of the post-apocalyptic, if you will, result of that. Right. We no longer have dairy cows. That land that was previously used to house them can be used for other things. The land previously used to feed them can be used for other things. And those nutrients are no longer being
Well,
produced.
now I want to speak to that for a second, right?
Certainly.
The majority of Americans are under the misassumption that cows are grazing on what is considered arable land that would be, oh, well, if the cows aren't used, we'll just plant crops of alfalfa and kale. No, the large majority of land in the United States is not eligible for growing crops because it's on hills, it's in the woods. Cows walk up hills and graze. They walk into the woods and graze. So I don't want people to go, well, we'd use that land for something else. We'd grow our soybeans on it. No, if you could grow soybeans on it, they'd be growing soybeans on it now. Cows end up on land that nobody wants. And that's the large majority of the available land in the United States that's used for grazing. And most of that land has little puddles of water and streams and ponds that cows literally walk into to cool off in the summertime and drink from. They're not drinking the water you and I would be drinking. I mean, there are occasions where there's drought and farmers have to bring water in to give cows in troughs. But by and large, cows drink the water that they find on the land. So they're not drinking our water. They're not stealing the land that we would be growing stuff on. So this idea that, well, if we got rid of cows, we'd find other things to do with that land. Well, unless you're talking about hill climbing and a dune buggy, there's nothing you're going to do with that land that cows haven't already done.
You're not wrong. The vast majority of cattle grazing in the US is done on land that's not suitable for other purposes. And anybody that questions that should just think about the economics of it. If it was profitable to produce something like soybeans on the land that we currently produce cattle on, we would be doing that instead because it's a lot more profitable than producing cattle and it's a lot less work. So yes, there's a very small portion of cattle grazing that's done on land that can be used for, or it can be cultivated. We look at only that portion, right? If we repurposed that specific portion for human food production, what could we do with it? The other portion of land that we talk about is the grain that's currently going for dairy consumption.
Feed them.
Now, yeah. So it's important to remember that grain is going for dairy cattle consumption, oftentimes because it's not suitable for human consumption or because it's a byproduct after we've processed grains for human consumption. Nevertheless, there is a small portion of a dairy cow's diet that is directly competitive with humans, and we could use that land for other purposes. So when we talk about repurposing land, those are the types of land resources we're talking about. And it's a great thing to point out to the lay reader that those are very small tracts of land in the context of the U.S. agricultural system.
Right. So the downstream effects now, I remember reading an article by someone who was actually on the show that showed that grazing, cows chomping at the grass, actually has an ability to recycle carbon dioxide, and that the actual actions of grazing contribute benefits to the ecological system. Is that true, in fact?
Yeah, it really very much depends on the grazing management. And we would like to say that in the US, the vast majority of our farmers are practicing good stewardship practices. We're not overgrazing lands. We're not creating large bare areas in our forage production systems. We're promoting grass growth. We're promoting soil health. And collectively, yes, that can lead to enhanced carbon sequestration in the soil and improved microbial capacity, all sorts of benefits.
Okay.
There's I should say there's always exceptions to the rule, right? I mean, it's kind of like, most of us have held a minimum wage job at some point, and not all the people that you work with are glorious, right? There's always that one employee that just can't do anything right. Not everybody's perfect, but the vast majority of our producers are very much committed to maximizing the efficiency of their grazing processes and making sure that they are doing so in a responsible manner.
So in the three scenarios you looked at, the export dairy scenario really didn't change anything because it's business as usual. We're just not consuming the end product here in the United States, right?
Correct.
But what about the retirement approach to retiring cows? And especially if there's some drastic approach to help retire them faster, like, mass euthanization or, something like that, where we just get rid of them all in one swipe. How much of the greenhouse gas footprint is reduced from a severe action like that?
Yeah, so in the different scenarios that we evaluate, the net impact on total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions is between 0.5% and 1% reduction.
That's shocking. So all this noise we hear constantly about how selfish we are to want cows and to raise cows because they're destroying the planet. I mean, people actually say that. They say cows are destroying the planet. It's not only incorrect, but it's a gross lie, a very, very, very unfair lie to say that if we got rid of all the cows tomorrow, all these greenhouse gases would just disappear, because the major contributors to greenhouse gases, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're really industrialization, factories, and the consumption of power and all these other things that we don't want to give up.
Yeah, so I should say two things on that. The first is exactly what you're pointing at. In the U.S., we have different sources of emissions that are quantitatively more important than agriculture, and those are predominantly energy, manufacturing, and transportation. That's not the case everywhere. And so part of where this misunderstanding comes from is the application of global data to local scenarios. So we look at, for example, data that includes large herds of unproductive animals in Southeast Asia and Africa. And that contributes to these global statistics, tremendously efficient herds that have been genetically selected for centuries at this point, for the express purpose of efficiently producing food for humans. So part of I think the misunderstanding is that inappropriate application of information. We take global statistics and we apply them locally as if they're applicable, and they're really not. The other thing that I think really confuses people is the discussion of footprints, so carbon footprints, water footprints. If you look at the carbon footprint of beef, as an example, we're talking about dairy, but if we look at beef, In the US, it's probably 16 to 18 kilos of CO2 per kilo of beef. If you compare that to a kilo of corn, that's less than 1 kilo of CO2 per kilo of corn. So if you just look at those two numbers, it's easy to understand how somebody who, again, is not thinking critically would say, oh my gosh, moving away from this high intensity product is going to be an environmental benefit. What we don't consider in those types of footprint calculations is why we consume those products. So as humans, we consume beef for very different nutritional reasons than we would consume a kilo of corn. And to say that they're equivalent just because they weigh the same is a complete fallacy. Similarly, right, the quantity of corn, as an example, produced in this country compared to the quantity of beef is also something that we need to consider when we're thinking about the national or perhaps the international implications of our actions, right? We produce a tremendous amount of cereal grains in this country, and they go for a wide variety of purposes, not just human consumption. So the system is a lot bigger than just diminishing it down to these simple kinds of comparisons. But it's an easy trap to fall into, to look at numbers like a carbon footprint and make assumptions about how your eating patterns may influence national level greenhouse gas emissions, because humans are reductionist. We like simple numbers, and it's easy to digest them. And that's the danger of that kind of reductionist philosophy.
We're gonna talk about this on the other side of the break. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to compare nutritional value of dairy. And if you feel, I know you've done research on beef cattle as well, and start to look at this from, there's an intrinsic value and an extrinsic value to every action. And I want to talk about that when we come back from the break. Stay tuned. You're listening to and watching Superhuman Radio. We'll be right back. Most people have heard of phytoestrogens, but did you know there are beneficial phytoandrogens? The top source of these is pine pollen. It even contains trace amounts of testosterone and DHEA. If you're looking for a 100% natural testosterone booster, this is worth trying. Lots of men love it, and it even works for women. Lost Empire Herbs offers the highest quality, wild-harvested, non-irradiated pine pollen backed by a 365-day money-back guarantee. It works for you, or you don't have to pay for it with nothing to send back. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Lost Empire. Use code SHR. Get 15% off your order today. If you've listened to this show for any length of time, you know that I have struggled to give up coffee for years. Coffee has destroyed my gut and it's impaired my health. Well, I haven't had coffee in months thanks to a product called Magic Mind. Magic Mind is the first nootropic blend I actually feel working. One shot and I'm good all day long. My memory is crystal clear and I'm able to function and have great focus without coffee or caffeine for that matter. If you want to try a product that really works, if you're like me and you want to give up coffee forever, or you just need something occasionally that will help you lift the brain fog, Magic Mind is your product. I promise you that this product you will feel when you use it. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Magic Mind, all one word, and use the code SHR for a whopping 20% off your first order. C60, also known as Buckminster fullerene, is the most powerful, most versatile antioxidant in the world. It's been shown in studies to double the lifespan of rodents. We all know the importance of taking antioxidants to slow aging, reduce inflammation, and improve mitochondrial function and energy production. But there are literally hundreds of antioxidants that would cost you thousands of dollars to take every day. I take one. I take C60 from C360 Health. Revive and Rejuvenate are two blends that harness the power of C60. Don't waste another minute. Go to shrnetwork.biz/revive and use the code SHR for 15% off and free shipping inside the United States today.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Are you 35 or older? Every year after puberty, your growth hormone decreases sometimes by 50% by the age of 35, and it only keeps going down from there. This affects everything from making it harder to recover from workouts, sleep, and a general loss of a sense of well-being. It also affects your ability to get and stay lean. BioPro Plus is the first of its kind, 100% non-synthetic alternative to prescription synthetic growth hormone treatments. All the benefits without any of the needles or side effects and 100% safe. Previously only available through doctors, you can go to shrnetwork.biz/biopro, that's BIOPRO, and use code SHR30 for $30 off today. You may be wondering why you're experiencing performance issues in the bedroom, but you're not alone. Over 30 million men experience a form of erectile dysfunction, and to many, it can feel defeating. Maybe you've tried pills, diets, exercise, but finally there's a proven solution. Meet Eddie, a discreet device designed to help men strengthen and maintain their erections. Pills can be costly and result in debilitating side effects, so I checked out Eddie by Giddy at shrnetwork.biz/Eddie and found out that over 95% of men experience positive results wearing Eddie, according to a 2021 clinical trial. This product simply works and is easy to use. Sign up for a subscription at shrnetwork.biz/Eddie and save $20 on your first device with promo code SUPER20 with free device resizes and 60-day guarantee. You'll be glad you tried it. Treat ED with Eddie at shrnetwork.biz/Eddie. That's EDDIE.
Move over, superheroes. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Welcome back to Superhuman Radio. We're talking with Dr. Robin White from Virginia Tech, and we're talking about the impact that eliminating dairy cows would have on the carbon footprint. Well, I guess the greenhouse gases, I should say. And it's really negligible. It's nothing. But let's talk about the other side of the coin now, Dr. White. From the nutrient standpoint, what do we lose? And is it more important than what we gain in the elimination of 0.7% greenhouse gases?
Yeah, so dairy cattle currently contribute a tremendous amount of the protein and amino acids available for human consumption from our agricultural system in the U.S. They're also providing a really important source of some of our essential fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals. When we remove dairy cattle in any of these scenarios, we see reductions in some critically important nutrients. Interestingly, we'll talk about amino acids for a little bit. We actually see increases in the availability of amino acids from the agricultural system if we shift away from dairy cattle production. And I
have to stop you there. So we know that there that are not found in plant-based proteins, especially things like leucine. And while a lot of people will argue that there are some amino acids that could cause advanced aging, we know that that's when they're out of balance. So what amino acids are we talking about that we would have a greater availability? Is there more leucine in plant-based proteins? Is there more glutamine in plant-based proteins? And are they extractable? Another discussion that came out of Don Lyman's lab up in University of Illinois was plant-based proteins aren't always bioavailable. Take in the case of soy, the antitrypsin inhibitors and soy protein really isn't very available, and that's why people get a lot of gas from eating soy protein. Speak about that, the amino acids per se.
Yeah, so you're going exactly where I wanted to with this discussion. One of the downfalls of this kind of national level evaluation is that we don't look at how individual foods get combined to create diets. So yes, we would have, actually about double the amount of leucine, as an example, produced in a system without dairy cattle as we do in our current production system. But the bioavailability of that is really in question. And then the concentration of amino acids in general in the foods that would be available are also something that we should really focus on. So one of the benefits of dairy products is actually the concentration of nutrients relative to other nutrients. So dairy products are a fairly low energy source of amino acids, and they also have high concentrations of essential fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals. So by consuming servings of dairy on a daily basis, you're making marginal and incremental progress toward each of those required nutrient categories. Whereas if we try to meet our amino acid requirements from some of the things that we feed dairy cattle, like cereal grains, there may be sufficient quantities of amino acid available, but if you and I balanced a diet to meet our amino acid requirement using cereal grains, we would dramatically exceed our energy requirements, which is a big challenge, right? Because that's exceeding energy requirements tends to be the nutritional focus for energy, whereas meeting requirements tends to be the nutritional focus for most of our important nutrients like amino acids, vitamins, minerals. So yes, dairy products provide really high concentration sources and well-balanced sources. We talk about complete proteins. Most of our animal products fall into that category. They contain our 10 essentials that are not always present in adequate quantities in plant proteins. So again, it's that relative balance of each of those amino acids that make dairy products such a reliable source of high quality proteins.
So there's another aspect of this discussion that I'd like to inject, no pun intended, at this point in time. And that is the role of milk in general. Milk is the only thing made by nature to be sustenance for a given species. And bovine milk and human milk are very, very close. Bovine milk is probably stronger, has a lot more of the good things that human breast milk has. But there's something else that always misses this discussion. Milk has transporter and chaperone proteins whose sole job is to take these things that are good for us and carry them into the bloodstream, go right through. So we know that amino acids in a free-form environment are reach the bloodstream through the lining of the stomach. They don't have to go through the whole digestive process entirely. And I can't speak to pasteurized milk. I've been a raw milk drinker for almost 20 years now. I only drink it seasonally. Cows don't like to give milk in the wintertime. It's a great energy expenditure. So I only drink it a few months out of the year. But we know that in raw unpasteurized milk, and perhaps in pasteurized milk, these transporter proteins and chaperone proteins remain intact in the milk, making the milk do magical things. Would you speak to that? Am I too far out off center now, or what do you think?
I'm just gonna go ahead and say that particularly the discussion of pasteurized versus unpasteurized milk there would be outside my area of expertise.
Yeah, I get that.
I can talk about the relative importance of the different nutrients and how they balance to human requirements, but probably not much more than that. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. So getting back to this discussion, when we look at the elimination of dairy cows completely for the impact on greenhouse gases, and then we look downstream at the literal elimination of nutrients from the available diet, which one wins?
Isn't that a good question? This is one of those really important socioeconomic challenges that I think we need to agree upon how we're going to address as a society. We take the standpoint in most of our studies of framing these discussions around meeting our domestic population's nutrient requirements as a necessity. That's the major goal of the agricultural system, is to provide sufficient sustenance for the humans in this country. There's, of course, a tremendous international exchange of nutrients through agricultural imports and exports. And that international exchange is something that's truly fascinating, and how the US agricultural system works into that is very complex. But nevertheless, it's the primary job of our agricultural system to provide sufficient food for the people of this country. It's also the primary job of the agricultural system to do that in a manner that doesn't impede our ability to continue that work for future generations. So you could say that they're really not, they're not separate goals. We really need to achieve both of them. We need to be producing food in a sustainable manner, and we need to be producing sufficient quantities of it. What we've been doing in the US over the last several decades is enhancing the efficiency of our production system. And that allows us to produce more food with fewer animals or with less land. And as a result of that, we've dramatically reduced the environmental footprint of the food that we are producing, right? So as our population has grown, we're able to more adequately meet the needs of that population with a relatively lower carbon emission. We're definitely not out of the woods yet. If you look at the net quantity of greenhouse gas emissions emitted, there's been an increase, and that increase is commensurate with the increase in human population. So as the US population is projected to level off, and it's already quite well on its way on that curve, as it reaches a more moderate growth rate or zero growth rate, it's going to be the job and the objective of the agricultural system to continue to produce sufficient quantities of food to meet the requirements of that population while continuing to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that production.
Is there anything, what could we do? Cows are producing such a small, minute amount of the contribution to greenhouse gases. It almost seems stupid to be discussing, well, what can we do with cows to make them produce less, when we should be looking at the real big heavy lifters in the discussion and thinking about how we can make those produce less and leave cows alone. But I almost feel like the whole discussion about cows is a distraction from what's really going on. And because cows, as you point out in your study so perfectly, are producing such a small amount of contributing factors to greenhouse gases that anybody with any common sense would say, well, why are we talking about cows? That seems so ridiculous. It's like they're not contributing to greenhouse gases to the extent that the media and the pundits and the people who have this agenda would have you believe. So, I kind of feel like, can't we just get past this? The cow. I did a blog post, and we're going to talk about when we come out of the next break, because I want to talk about beef when we come back, because I know you have some research. We're talking about dairy cows right now, and obviously the real effort to get rid of cows is those who say eating meat is bad and it's destroying our planet and all that sort of stuff. And there's nothing further from the truth about that as well. But I want to take a break, and when we come back, I want you to tell me, does any of this research that you've done in the past show that beef cattle are just as innocuous when it comes to producing greenhouse gases? Okay.
All right.
All right. So sit tight. We'll be right back, and we'll get to that topic when we come back. More than 240 million Americans take supplements daily in pill form, but poor nutrient absorption means the promised results are rarely achieved. Healthy Cell uses a clinically proven patent-pending gel delivery system that increases absorption by 165% over pill form. Go to shrnetwork.biz/healthycell. That's HEALTHYCELL today, and use the code SHR to save 20% off your purchase of Healthy Cell supplements.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good good night's sleep because I don't have my pillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/mypillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High-quality, pasture-raised, great-tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose-to-tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 10% off your entire first order. If you'd like a shortcut to better sleep, more energy, and calmer, more stable moods, then you should make sure you're supplementing with magnesium daily. Let me tell you why. About 75% of people are magnesium deficient. This deficiency can lead to higher levels of anxiety, irritability, trouble sleeping, and low energy. It can even contribute to foot and leg cramps while you sleep. Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers is the single best magnesium supplement in the world. Simply take 2 capsules before you go to bed, and you'll be amazed by the improvements in your mood and energy levels and how much more rested you feel when you wake up. I take Magnesium Breakthrough every night, and I sleep better because I use it. Go to magbreakthrough.com/SHR and use the code SHR10 during checkout to save 10% off and get free shipping. Check it out. Plant medicine has become all the rage for mental optimization. Now there's an ancient plant medicine rapidly growing in popularity that experts believe might just be the alcohol of the future. It's called True Kava. Kava is a natural food-grade elixir that has been used for over 3,000 years by South Pacific Islanders as safe, non-addictive alternative to drugs and alcohol. By naturally boosting the brain's main feel-good chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, Kava provides you with both increased relaxation and mental clarity at the same time. True Kava is a new form of stabilized full-spectrum traditional kava that is third-party lab tested for quality and safety. Go to shrnetwork.biz/true kava, and that's TRUKAVA, all one word, and use code SHR for 25% off today.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
Welcome back. Now we're going to talk a little bit about beef cows. So you've researched this area as well, right? In previous studies, correct?
Correct.
So tell me what you learned. Is it a different scenario than dairy cows? Are beef cattle appropriately targeted for contributing to global warming?
Yeah, so I think the target on beef cattle largely revolves around what we talked about earlier with the differences in carbon footprinting or water footprinting between alternative foods, regardless of what those may be, and ruminant animal products. Dairy are a little bit exempt from that because the carbon footprint of milk is actually much closer to the carbon footprint of most plant products. So a lot of the focus on beef cattle is very likely, I would imagine, due to the differences in carbon footprint. We have a 2019 paper doing a similar kind of evaluation for beef cattle and how they fit into a sustainable food production system in the United States. Beef provides a different suite of nutrients from dairy products, but a lot of the same kinds of focus. Protein, amino acids. It's a complete protein, so the very similar amino acid profile.
Heavy iron. You have heavy iron. Very critical. Yeah.
Definitely in terms of our minerals, we would have iron, zinc, and selenium, which are 3 really critically important ones, and the bioavailability in beef is significantly higher than in many other sources.
Well, and I would challenge the USDA to do this. The USDA should look at beef and test for the availability and presence of every vitamin and mineral, because I have already had someone do this. There is vitamin C in beef, but it's not listed anywhere on the label. And it makes perfect sense. Cows actually make their own vitamin C. They're one of the, we and hamsters are the only, guinea pigs. Humans and guinea pigs are the only species on the planet that don't manufacture their own vitamin C. There's a lot of theories why it is. Did it get pushed out from evolutionary pressure? But cows make their own vitamin C. There's vitamin C in beef. If the USDA would go back and categorize and identify every vitamin and mineral in beef, we would find out that it is the only true superfood. The only food you could eat every day, every meal for the rest of your life and not end up with a nutrient deficiency. The Chinese Navy knew that thousands of years ago when they were bringing cows on, raising them, milking them, and processing them and feeding everybody that, and no one got scurvy.
Yeah, so to defend the USDA, they actually do have an online database that contains all measured nutrient concentrations on all different foods. And the FDA's regulation of food labeling, I think, is where your challenge is best highlighted. That the regulations around food labeling in the US are actually not always well suited to helping the average consumer suss out what is a good source of nutrients. I think that they really make an effort to highlight some of the important things, like the changes in food labeling that have occurred to highlight calorie counts. I would hope are going to have an impact on helping people understand the energy implications of the foods that they pick. But certainly the minimum requirements on the types of nutrients that must be reported on food labels mean that we assume that those are the only nutrients provided by the food, when in fact, most foods do have substantially more than what's reported on the label. It just may be in smaller concentrations. So that's where they get to this effort to try and label things as a good source or an excellent source of a particular nutrient. And as we talked a little bit about with dairy, right, that's a limited view because it only looks at one thing. And if you're doing something like, as an example, consuming beef to meet your protein requirement, you probably also want to know how that effort progresses toward other objectives, like meeting your daily requirements for things like vitamin B12 and your omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. We don't capture that multifaceted aspect of nutrient profiles well within our current food labeling schemes.
Right.
I don't know what the answer to that is, other than kind of self-education about what nutrients are available in your foods, because it is free online information, but that requires people to have the time and the wherewithal to go in and mine that information, which is quite tedious and unlikely to be a realistic solution.
If you just Google Superhuman Radio, why soy is unsustainable, you'll find a blog I did back in 2016 or 17. Because I kept hearing this saying amongst plant-based people that it takes some ridiculous amount of water to produce just 3 ounces of beef. And I was like everybody else. I just assumed it was right. And then I thought, I'm going to look into this. And I have all the sources listed. I went to universities that specialize in animal husbandry. I went to organizations that specialize in big ag. And I compared an acre of soy with 1 cow, and all the calculations are in there. What's really edible on the cow, all that stuff. This is just the summary, what I found out. 3-ounce serving of beef provides 578 kcals, while 3-ounce serving of soybeans, 382. So just from an energy standpoint, beef wins. When you factor in that it requires, you ready for this? 4 times as much water to produce that serving of soybeans. Soybeans loses hands down. The reality is, because cows graze and they drink water that is just standing water on various areas of land, you realize that in order to meet the requirement, I even took into account the number of rain days, the average number of rain days in a growing season. I mean, if you read this article, what you'll find out is that if you think critically and really look for the answers to these individual questions and piece them together, you find out it takes way more water to grow soy than it does to raise beef cattle. And no one's going to pick this article up and promote it because it doesn't fit the agenda. But go Google Superhuman Radio, why soy is unsustainable. Read the blog post. Look at, every source, every university study that I found answers to these different questions, every organization is right there where I got the information. Read this and then think to yourself, wow, like beef is actually better for you. Forget about the various nutrients, vitamins, quality of protein, things that you can't get like hemi-iron and B12 from plant sources. When you factor all that in, you go, oh my God, I should be eating more beef. Everybody who's read this goes to me, I guess I should be eating more beef. It's really kind of funny. So
yeah, if I can speak on the water footprint thing just very quickly, that also goes back to the same types of misconceptions about what a carbon or a water footprint means. When we evaluate those types of footprints, we evaluate all of the inputs to a production system. So in the case of beef, we look at everything from the inputs to the cropping system through the feedlot farm gate. So 90 plus, in most studies, it's about 98% of the water footprint published for beef cattle is associated with irrigation. So that's just water that's going to crop production. And it's the same kind of fallacy as what we talked about earlier. If you got rid of beef cattle, you'd still be using that land for productive purposes. You'd still be irrigating on it. And so it's not necessarily a fair way to do a comparison of the true water use associated with the different products to simply rely on footprints.
Very unfair.
Yeah, and that's above and beyond the issue that you've highlighted, which is the difference between blue water, which is what we consume, and green and gray water, which are subsurface and surface sources.
Dr. White, I want to thank you so much for publishing this study, and I hope that it gets picked up by more in the mainstream, because it's time for the truth to get out there. It's time for people to understand the realities of what they're being told. Beef is not destroying the planet. There's a lot of things destroying the planet. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's not there aren't things that we need to address, but cows isn't one of them. We need to stop this nonsense. This narrative is nonsense. Thank you so much for coming on the show.